It is our first show of 2024, and we start off with a special edition wishing you a very happy new year. Now, we have a heated issue that has been making rounds for the past few days. The Ministry of Finance on Monday, which was the 8th of January 2024, released a statement with the 2024 revenue measures en route to market value-added tax, sugar content on beverages, among other things. Now, to help us unpack this issue and give us a little bit more detail, we have the Chief Executive Officer of the Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Christopher Mugaga. Sir, the Minister of Finance on Monday, which was the 8th of January, released a statement with the 2024 revenue measures on value-added tax and sugar content on beverages. Now, this was after consultation with different bodies of the industry, the Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce being one of them, the one you represent. Will these changes address the problems which business was more concerned about?
Well, I think what is more significant is to appreciate that when faced sometimes with some of the challenges, we just have to avoid kicking the cane continuously down the road, knowing fully well that some of the challenges, obviously, they are not necessarily new. But what's more important is to find a sustainable, lasting, and quite relevant solution mechanism to deal with them. Is private sector also coming in on all the issues you are just asking? We continue engaging both the Ministry of Industry as well as the Treasury to find a lasting solution, knowing that some of the very types of VAT which are impacting on business right now, they are causing a bloodbath regarding threat of jobs data. You look at the export industry itself, we represent a number of companies which are also into export. And then you also look at the dragon of informality, which we are currently immersed in at the moment. We are quite very fully aware of the degree and intensity of informality in the economy. And so when the Treasury is coming up with a raft of measures somehow to try to deal with the whole dragon of informality, we are aware of the very noble intentions, but maybe what could be worrisome are the unintended consequences, some of which will be somehow damaging in the medium to long term.
So now, what are some of those consequences that you're talking about?
The consequences, sometimes you know very well, when someone is not paying tax, it's a bad. But what is inspiring such a business to shun, to avoid and evade paying tax? It's a case of maybe a very unfaithful partner in a relationship. Do you have to put CCTV cameras wherever they go for you to say, I'm managing my relationship? Or you find a lasting solution which will make the marriage strong, regardless of where the partner is? So that's exactly what we are raising when we say, let's create that kind of a tax environment which will allow for businesses to be willing to be the ones who make a beeline to go to the tax authorities and say, this is our duty, national duty even espoused within the Constitution, to own our obligations through paying taxes, rather than they track them through the halls to say pay tax. It will create its own unintended consequences.
Okay. Now, Mr. Mugaga, under this new set of laws, manufacturers are only permitted to sell to institutions such as hotels, schools, and other corporates, provided that the clients are registered for the VAT. Now, how important is this modification as far as helping enhance access to markets and products is concerned?
Yeah, I think, like I said, the intentions remain quite very noble, knowing fully well the bigger picture we want to achieve as Zimbabweans. But if I may take you back rather to on the 23rd of April 2023 last year, when the Minister of Industry and Commerce came up with a raft of measures through what they call the value chain refinancing facility. What we want as an industry is to continue capacitating the value chain by not administering it through measures, but funding, capacitating. Most of the companies in Zimbabwe at the moment, I tell you, they are still feeling the after effects of COVID. People think COVID-19 happened in a different century, but most of the business in the country, they're trying to find a way back to their feet. So the raft of measures, by their implication, they may not be bad when you look at the intention. But if you look at the consequences, I tell you, that's where the problem then becomes, because the after effects of COVID, we still are living with them, where companies are struggling somehow to preserve their balance sheets.
Okay,
and in the process, we then need a holistic approach.
What needs to be done to make sure that the intentions and the consequences meet?
It's the intentions and the consequences. Sometimes they don't necessarily have to meet, but what's more necessary is to create what we call a predictable policy climate, where we don't want to meet next fortnight also to discuss the same issues, for the reason that we want to grow the industry. And the best reward or incentive you can give to a business is to tell it that tomorrow will remain like what it is today. It becomes easier to plan. The biggest tax disincentive you can pose to a business is not necessarily the fiscal tax you hear about. It's the level of uncertainty which you can try to generate. And that's what we continue crying for, engaging both the treasury, like I say, and the industry ministry to make sure that we clear all the haziness within the policy environment to the extent that going deeper into 2024, we want to see manufacturing sector, we want to see the retail sector, we want to see the construction sector contributing significantly to GDP and remain, or rather come back to become one of the major sources of growth within the sub-Saharan Africa.
Now, it seems that the authorities may have looked at some of the consequences that you're talking about, because just recently we saw a statement which was stating that basic foods items, including bread, milk, cooking oil, mealie meal, and so many other things are now to be zero rated for VAT and exempted for VAT purposes. What is likely to be the impact of this on prices of basic commodities?
Obviously, if you look at it, you don't necessarily just look at it from a price angle, but also from a consumer welfare. Consumer welfare goes beyond the inflation threat because we also want to see the incentive to manufacturers to go back to the factory and produce. And this is a very welcome move, the zero rating. What we need to learn, maybe there's already a textbook case if you go to an economy today called Kenya in the East African economy. A raft of tax measures in 2023 are what an average Kenyan is feeling today, and we seem to be loving to go the same route. But the consequences for Kenyan economy are there for all to see. So I think zero rating of products you mentioned, we want to see a lot of products somehow not attracting higher taxation levels. Why? High taxation, it then appears like a revenue-raising measure when it's supposed to be just a tool somehow to redistribute wealth and at the same time to create a level playing field for businesses within the economy.
Now, is this of concern to other producers as well?
It is self-concerning across the board. And as we continue engaging the authorities, what is more significant and refreshing, obviously, is they somehow seem to listen, because just 24 hours ago, I think you saw a raft of measures with revisions from the Treasury on a number of areas. And we'll continue pushing to make sure that the biggest winner after all the negotiations remains the economy of Zimbabwe, because we need to create jobs, we need to export goods out there, we need to create the balances which had been decimated following 2 years of uninterrupted COVID-19, which we still have the after effects up today.
Definitely. We seem to have quite a number of issues to be discussing in this special edition of World of Business. Join us in the second segment as we continue with this discussion with the Chief Executive Officer of the Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Christopher Mugaga. Welcome back. Now, this is the second segment of World of Business. Now, today, we have been talking about the implications of the new VAT rules on informal traders. To help us unpack this, we have the Chief Executive Officer of the Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Christopher Mugaga. Now, as we continue with the discussion, will these measures not create a parallel or shadow or black market for many of the goods?
What is important is to appreciate that when you introduce measures, sometimes through the modeling techniques you use in planning, the consequences can be positive or negative. But what's more significant, obviously, is to pick the bad signals coming out of the market and correct. I would want to prophesy and say the measures which were introduced are going to have negative consequences, surely, because the reason why they are being introduced is to see the bigger scheme of things is to see an economy, macroeconomic economy, the headline GDP growth facing northwards. But consequences are always sometimes not what you intend them to be, which is the reason why we continue engaging the Treasury, like you saw with the push to make sure that the sanitization of the value chain, where we are saying there is no middleman other than a wholesaler who can then sell to a retailer. is something which was certainly not one thing one could easily comprehend. And I'm happy that the Treasury had also revised it downwards, knowing fully well that an economy is a dynamic ecosystem where you don't structure it in a silo mentality kind of model where you say, after putting this measure, these are the results I want, which is the reason possibly you see also economics considered to be a social science. It's because there are a lot of factors or dynamics then which define how an economy goes. So it's also important to be patient, but at the same time to be cautious as we make our policies, because the moment you make a policy to do with just informal sector, you'll be losing the track for simple reason that informality is an underground economy. It's an economy running away from the light of the day. What they want is to operate under the grey economy. So when you put policies and focus your energy on dealing with them, you would definitely see that from a cost-benefit analysis, maybe the government will then become the biggest loser in that journey.
All right. But now, Mr. Mugaga, obviously, one of the intentions by government introducing such measures was to promote the consumption of local goods. Will this policy now not push away consumers to intake exports? Because these measures, if you're saying they have consequences, some of which are very critical to the informal sector, will people now not go and find their goods somewhere else, which is not the local market?
No, what makes people find goods somewhere else is the spirit of rationality. Where a good is much more cheaper in your neighboring street than the other street, you are bound to go for a cheaper good. Our focus should not necessarily to try to put lenses to say, look at these products, no matter whether they are cheap or not. Create an environment where the cost and ease of producing those goods becomes your first priority.
So
once
now
you achieve that,
are these policy measures creating that environment?
Yeah, policy measures, you can't look at them in total and say because he has created this will have implications of this. Like I said, it's a dynamic journey where when a policy is made, sometimes we come in as industry and say, you could have fine-tuned in this way. We feel like this policy will have these implications. So it's not a cast in stone where you can look at a policy and say, because the policy was set, it will cause this disaster. I don't think anywhere across the world that's how policies are set or interpreted. But what's more important is when you set policy, look at the jobs, look at the GDP growth, look at the export receipts potential, look at even the confidence you are inducing into that economy. Once that is achieved, I tell you, you have a balanced economy. And our duty as private sector is to assist government in making sure that we have a balanced economy where investors are attracted to it, both domestic and foreign investors. There is always a misinterpretation of investment to think an investor is someone coming from outside the country. But the biggest investors we have right now, if you look at the biggest soldiers in this market, are the local companies. We have somehow withstand all the heat either from the natural causes of COVID, El Nino, or whatever, and they still are standing tall. And we want to protect those companies because those are our heritage.
All right. Now, finally, looking at government's call on formalization, viewing it as a path to boost state revenues, what other ways can the government work on to increase revenue besides this taxation system?
Very good question. I think, firstly, let me say, the focus should not be on increasing tax revenue. Because in increasing tax revenue, you can still balance your books, but you have a lot of corporate tombstones with companies collapsing because they have to pay the tax. The bigger picture, like I said, is taxation should be an instrument which is an equalizer, distributing resources from the rich rather, to the poor, and at the same time allowing government projects to take place. We should not be attracted by government accounts looking stable or in surplus. What's more important is what impact is it having on the industry, on the common man in the street. That's what we need. So as long as taxation policy is focused on revenue raising, it becomes a bad tax, because there's no country which has taken itself out of poverty and said because we are going to continue using a tax policy, we are going to become a prosperous nation. What's more important is to have relevant tax programs which speaks into the dynamics economy of Zimbabwe, how to make us competitive, how to make our goods acceptable and cheaper across the borders. But if we continue somehow being excited with levying taxation in the name of making sure everyone pays the tax, I tell you we can then create the corporate tombstones which I'm talking about, where most companies will lose their life.
Okay, Mr. Christopher Mugaga, thank you so much for coming through to World of Business. I'm sure that our viewers had one or two things that they got from this discussion. Well, that was the second segment of World of Business. When we come through in the third and final segment of World of Business, our field correspondent, Sela Marere, will take us through the Entrepreneur of the Week. Welcome to the third and final segment of World of Business, where we give the spotlight to Entrepreneur of the Week. Now, the World of Business team spoke to Dr. Tinashe Manzungu, a renowned property investment owner and expert as well, and a local business guru. Now, let us hear more from Sele Marere as she speaks to Dr. Manzungu.
Infrastructure development remains one of the key enablers to the government's vision of transforming Zimbabwe into an upper middle income society by 2030. It is in this spirit that today we're joined by a property investment chief, a business mogul, and a former president of the Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce, Dr. Tinashe Manzungu. He's going to tell us more about his journey in this conversation. Dr. Manzungu, thank you so much for joining us today, and it's our pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for considering us and getting us to the program. We really quite appreciate it.
All right, so first things first, for the sake of that person who is watching you for the first time, who is Dr. Tinashe Manzungu in a few lines?
Dr. Manzungu is a medium-aged man who is a born Zimbabwean and doing work in Zimbabwe for the benefit of Zimbabweans. Went to school, went to college, and went to university in Zimbabwe. And now is the time to give back to the country, and that is what Dr. Manzungu is all about.
Tell us about your decision to join the construction industry, particularly with the aim of increasing housing infrastructure.
Okay, you see that from the economic pillars that we have in Zimbabwe, we have infrastructure as one of the very key pillars according to NDS 1. And we are saying we're highly involved in construction works. We are talking of building works, we are talking of civil works. So this is one of our key mandates, is our investment portfolio.
Okay, so you said you started off in Gweru. Tell us about your experience from the time that you started and some of the challenges that you faced and how you managed to overcome them.
You see that when you start a business, or in my case, straight away from university, I went to, that's how I began my industry, this organization. So the first challenge now was to say, consider this as a capital intensive project, right? It's not a simple project, but indeed then you need to have the capital to do it. I didn't have the capital, and the biggest challenge now was to say, how do I make my projects go without capital? So this was the biggest challenge, and I had to maneuver to get that done. Number two, you are not bankable. No bank will give you capital. No finance house will lend you anything, and no one will trust you. So this was the biggest challenge. The other challenge was for people looking at the edge of the person who is talking of infrastructure projects, and considering that you do not have experience, you are young, that could not give people confidence to invest in you.
Okay, so you said you started off as a young boy and it was difficult for people to build their trust in you because they were not sure of the results that were going to come about. What would you say to that young person who particularly has the same idea or different idea, but they are lacking funding or they don't have the confidence to venture into the industry or the corporate world?
Definitely. It's all about thinking outside the box. It's not the finance house or the bank that is going to come with money and give you so that you start your business. But it is a rule that has to be known that that special, good, brilliant idea attracts money. Money flows towards the best ideas. So this is exactly what happened to me, and that's capital. So I'm just giving a case study of how things can work. What I can tell that young Zimbabwean, young person who is trying to get into business, we are saying it's all about strategically positioning yourself and knowing where you belong.
Dr. Manzungu, the National Development Strategy 1 puts more emphasis on value addition as one of the critical elements that are going to be used in us achieving Vision 2030 as a nation. How would you say that you're contributing to national development looking at this trajectory?
Okay, allow me to talk of vertical integration in our construction industry. Remember, we also rely on suppliers, on materials. Then we then had to look down and up to see how we can also close the gaps in terms of value addition. And we are starting from a residential stand. And when you produce or develop a residential stand, it is not good enough to be a home until you put in the building, the house, is it? That is value addition. If your land, a piece of land was probably costing, say, $10 per square meter, right? on selling a residential stand. When you then put build the building, the superstructure, maybe that's a 5-room house, it becomes probably, say, $150 per square meter. Now you are selling the houses, say 30,000, 40,000. That is value addition. You have put in the bricks and the cement and the roofing sheets. That's now a house. That's value addition. We went on then to say, yes, we can do the house, but now, in fact, we need to make sure that the materials at some point we need to be providing ourselves so that we do more. So you find that in 2023, we also then moved into investing into Ibera sheet plant, a roofing plant, a machine. We now have it as Zimbabwe, and that is producing capacity of about 300 tons per month. That's quite huge. And the projects that we are also looking at or doing, or those that we have already done in 2023, have been roofed using our own materials. That's value addition. Not only that, but we have also, we had the opportunity to have a project that was some 370 kilometers away from the next brick plant. That was too far. And what does it mean? Cost in terms of logistics, bringing the bricks on site. What did we do? We then imported a brick molding machine that also produces about 20,000 to 30,000 bricks per day, standard bricks. And that is now another new avenue. So we are simply taking the clay soil, doing the bricks, and when you do the bricks, we value it by building the houses. You see now.
So I'll draw your attention a bit on the issue of building to the people that are in the wetlands, and particularly those that get displaced whenever we've got different climatic conditions, particularly when you have heavy rainfalls. As an expert in the construction industry, what would you like to say? And as a company, do you have any plan for the people that are in the wetlands?
If there's no infrastructure laid out correctly, a wetland also comes to play. So what are we saying? We are saying to avoid issues to do with wetlands, to already build structures is an issue of re-engineering the place, looking at how we can improve drainage. We might not be able to ameliorate or eliminate a total disaster, total cause or total results of wetlands. But what we can do is simply looking at remodeling how roads should be. Then also as an advice to people who are already in those kind of areas where nothing could probably barely be done at the moment. We are saying when building, make sure that your flow level is quite high to avoid water flowing into your house. Because water will always flow. But if your flow level is quite high, say for example, 0.5 meter to 1 meter, that will also assist in avoiding wetlands.
So with the National Development Strategy 1, 2021 to 2025 being almost past halfway through its implementation stage, what are some of the projects that you can recall that you have done as a company that you'd look back and celebrate as one of your biggest projects that you have done to date?
Our major thrust is on building and civil works. Under buildings, we have done quite a number of housing construction in the Midlands, in Matabeleland South, in Matabeleland North. Matabeleland South, we're talking of Gwanda areas. Matabeleland North, we're talking of Wange areas. We are talking of Gweru, Kwekwe, we're talking of Shavani in the Midlands. And these projects, really, according to NDS2, if you check on the cluster of housing, you would see the targets were to get 220 housing units by 2025. But already that has been changed because that target was got not by government alone, but by government plus private sector, meaning to say we are involved in that kind of number. And that number has been revised to 1 million. And that 1 million, we are already on task to get it. Already, we are delivering more than 600 housing units in the town of Wange, which is soon to be a town. It's currently it's a local board. It's going to be a town because of our influence as well. We have done the same in Gweru, where we have produced more than 3,000 housing units in Gweru alone. You see, we have done the same in Kwekwe, and currently we have a new project in Shavani. In Gwanda, we're looking towards the same as well, about 1,700 housing units. So we have done that in the housing delivery service unit. Meaning to say in that million, we have played a major role as well. And coming to infrastructure servicing, we're talking of sewer, water, roads. Again, in those same areas, I have told you before, as you were asking about value integration, value addition, right? We started in dealing with roads, the sewer, the water, is it? Including the electrification now. We've now diversified into electrical works. So we have done the same, and Currently, we're also working, as I earlier on told you, we're doing the same in Gwanda, we're doing the same in Wange as well. Right now, surfacing is taking place.
So my next question would have been about the achievements that you celebrate today as a business, but from the conversation that we have had, we can pick that there are so many of them that you've done for the nation of Zimbabwe, and we definitely applaud you for that. But let's talk about your staff complement, because definitely employment creation is one of the elements that you're touching on. What's your staff complement at the moment?
Okay, in construction we do have both permanent and casual employees. In total, I can remember around November, the last time I checked, we are around 1,900 to 1,000 employees. You know, that 1,000, about 100 are permanent employees. And the mixture being the top management, the middle management, then all the rest will be artisans and also general hands.
So, Dr. Manzungu, it has been such an educational conversation, I must say, that we've had with you, because besides being an entrepreneur in Zimbabwe, you're also a business expert in a certain field. As your words of inspiration to that aspiring young person who wants to venture into the construction industry, that young person who is sitting on their idea because they're lacking funding or confidence, or that entrepreneur is already in the industry, but they are failing to maneuver their way through. What would you like to tell them at this point?
Yeah, I repeat this one. The door has been very much open to both local Zimbabweans or probably talk of even startup investors who may want to come to Zimbabwe. The door is open, as we know the mantra Zimbabwe is open for business, right? And also moving towards this other mantra that we have to say, why? What are we talking about? We are saying you are the people who are going to build Zimbabwe. Right now I'm proud because I am building the nation, I'm building Zimbabwe, I'm playing my part before I get old, right? I won't be able to do this when I get old.
Thank you so much, Dr. Manzungu, for the enriching conversation that we had with you today. We have learned a lot, and I'm sure the citizens of Zimbabwe can agree with me there. It has been such an insightful conversation. Thank you so much.
Well appreciated. Thank you so much for also having me and hosting me to this wonderful program. Looking forward to another one like this one.
What an insightful conversation we have had with Dr. Tinashe Manzungu, who believes that Zimbabwe is for the Zimbabweans, and it is our sole responsibility as citizens of Zimbabwe to build our own nation. And it is for that reason that we firmly proclaim that Nyika inovakwa nevenevayo ilizwe lakiwa ngabanikazi balo. And that brings an end to this week's segment of our Entrepreneur of the Week. Be sure to join us again in our next segment. It's now back to the studio.
That was the third and final segment of World of Business that brought into the spotlight that indeed the future of Zimbabwe lies in the strengths of its citizens. That brings us to the end of this week's edition. Join us next week as we look at more business stories and all things kaching.